Sparta decumani legio gemina. Summus quarta decumani legio gemina. Offerte deviate cedite. Offerte deviate cedite. Cornus sonat pede inferre.
Hi guys, what's going on? And welcome back to another video on Conqueror's Blade as we dive into the new tier 4. The Myrmillones, or the Scutarii as their elite version seems to be called, which is a slightly easier name to pronounce. So I did some testing on these in the PTR back before the season actually launched, and I said they were pretty horrible. And actually, based on the testing at the time, I kind of would stick to that. They really did almost no damage at all, and they weren't really that defensive either. They have certainly improved since I last got to play them on the PTR. They're by no means setting the server ablaze with their amazingness, but they are at least a usable unit now, and they do have some decent abilities. So let's kind of break down a little bit how I've found them and how I've been playing them, some of the problems I've come across, and what I kind of do well as well, which is always handy. So they are primarily a shield unit. One of the big problems I kind of highlighted on the PTR was their low damage. And they still do have low damage, right? They don't do much. You're not going to be getting vast numbers of kills with this unit in most games. Maybe you have some exceptions. I haven't even had any exceptions. All of my games with them have been fairly low kills. They're a defensive unit. They're about holding and taking areas, holding a point, and that they actually do pretty well. The only real damage ability they have is their Myrmillones guard. It's basically where the unit rushes forwards, holding their shields kind of in front of their face, and it is an active block as they charge. That's important if you charge the front of, say, Fortebraccios or something like that. It is an active block as they charge forwards. Then when they hit their enemy, they basically send them flying and smash their shield into their face. Always nice to do. Does quite a bit of damage. Reasonably damaging ability. Can pick up hero kills. Can do a good chunk of damage to enemy units. It's the only ability they have, and it's the only ability that really does any decent damage. Now, other than that, they get 3 formations. Shield wall in sort of like a line formation. Occasionally useful, pretty hard to utilise really, I find. I'm tending to rather use the Testudo, which is the formation they naturally form into after using the Myrmillones guard, or the Chiltron, where they form like a tight circle and they hold shields above the head and in front of them. And it's also important to note a few things about these formations and then their unit traits. When they are in formation, they heal. Now that's quite important. It's quite a decent self-heal. Not going to be, setting the world on fire, but a decent self-heal. And that is quite nice to have, particularly if you get caught far away from a supply point, get into some smaller skirmishes, survive, win the fight, leave the unit in formation, they do heal themselves back up. They also get enhanced defenses when they're in shield formation. So that's why I say they're quite good at these sort of holding formations where they're holding a narrow or tight part of the wall. Do that pretty well. They also get a shield bash, basically. Quite effective, triggers quite regularly, does knock people back, does knock them down. But the only problem they got is they don't get CC immunity. And I think if you're comparing them to something like Grey Hairs, which is kind of a comparable unit, I think, then that's where they start to struggle, because Grey Hairs do get CC immunity, or at least a triggerable CC immunity, and they do quite a lot of damage, and they get a charge. And that's where I think this unit starts to struggle a little bit more when you're comparing them to things like Grey Hairs. In terms of veterancy line, there's broadly 2 options. The bottom line, which is slightly more defensively focused, ending in increased defences, but there's quite a lot of comparable lines, crossover. I think there's one somewhere, reduced damage when armour is pierced, something like that. And that's sort of on both lines. But the top line is just slightly more damage-based, increased damage while in a non-dispersed, formation, things like that. But it's a relatively small increases. I've tried both lines. You'll see some of the footage is from the top line, some of it is from the bottom line. No real vast difference. In my opinion, they're more of a holding unit than they are a damaging unit. and this top line doesn't provide them with enough extra damage to really make it worthwhile. So for me, I've been running them on the bottom line. So in terms of Doctrines, they are classed as a spear unit, which is interesting considering they have a sword, but they are classed as a spear unit for a Doctrine point of view. That means you can put block recovery on, you can put the extra defensive stats on, which is really nice to have because they actually have relatively low defensive stats, only getting sort of 640, 600 on the piercing and slashing. But you of course don't know how much that increases by when they get their enhanced defenses. It doesn't tell us, so we don't actually know, but obviously that's obviously pushing it up a little bit higher. Other than that, I have been running the Myrmillones guard cooldown. 5 seconds is a decent chunk of cooldown, and given that the shield charge is basically the only offensive ability they have, I kind of think it's worth having. Other than that, there are a few other possible options. You could put on just the flat block increase, which would be kind of nice to have. The problem is, I find the kind of CC, the lack of CC immunity that tends to mean that you end up getting nudged out of formation more regularly before the block actually seems to run out. So I kind of find that's more of a problem. And so I put on a siege fighter and a damage to units just to try and give them a slightly higher base damage, just so they can actually get a little bit of kills in, a little bit of extra damage against enemy units. Anyway, I have talked for way too long, so let's hop into a few games, see if we can actually kind of highlight some of the pros and then some of the cons of this unit. So we kick things off on Varos, a map that's only fairly recently been re-added to the siege queue, and since I don't really play much territory wars, very confusing having a new map that I know my way round in no way at all, so you'll see me looking at the map quite a lot and walking around in some vague confusion. But anyway, I did have enough sense to notice that the enemy was starting to push the B point because there's a breach in that sidewall they can push their way through. Didn't quite know how to get there, but trying to make my way towards B, sister team there, let's try and hold the B point, because once you've lost B, you basically lose at A, and that's the same for all maps. Anyway, as we come round the corner, I've got a few enemies starting to pressure the point, so I'm pulling the unit on, and initially just get myself on, line up, go straight in for a shield charge. Okay, clips 1 or 2 berserkers, and when you get a good clip on the berserkers, it does actually kill them, because it does do enough damage. And actually if we pause here, you can see the berserker on the left actually getting the shove back from the shields. The shield knockback is actually pretty decent on this unit. We then get charged into by a unit of palace guards. I try and negate that a little bit with my hero, and we do relatively okay, and the unit sort of fights on. I find that having a fairly sort of CC focused hero is really handy here because, as we say, the unit doesn't have any CC resistance, so heroes are really effective at disrupting the formation. And see, when we're here without any enemy heroes, they actually fight reasonably effectively against those palace guards. Okay, you're not really getting many kills, but the palace guards weren't doing a lot either. But as a lot more stuff starts to stack up and heroes start to get in, I break formation, go for a shield slam, pick up a chunk of damage, pull back, try and reform. But as a lot of stuff starts to push in, they aren't able to reform the group because they don't have any CC immunity, get overwhelmed, and they basically get themselves unfortunately wiped out. Picks us up 20 or so kills, holds the point for a reasonably good chunk of time, but I think the problem is, if you can compare them to Grey Hairs, Imperial Spearguard, would those units have held up better? Yes, I think they probably would have done. Well anyway, flip this round to the other side, and we're now attacking on Varos. Seem to be getting this map a lot recently. Anyway, I thought this was kind of an interesting clip against these few berserkers here. Come down, and a few things happen. One, because I've still got them in the Shiltron formation, I use the shield charge, it doesn't activate. See, the unit didn't move forwards at all. They either seem to have to be in the turtle formation or in a loose formation for it to activate. So anyway, that doesn't work. Leave them in the Shiltron. And you actually kind of see how the berserkers get on. A little bit of hero fighting, but mostly it's just watching them pushing into the shields. See how they push them back every time? You're not really killing the berserkers, you just don't really have the damage potential for that. But actually, they didn't really seem to get through the unit that effectively as well. So for me, it really seems to be heroes that kill this unit more than anything. Because once it loses its formation, its sort of integrity, then it gets slaughtered by the units really quickly. But as long as it can hold its sort of unit integrity, it doesn't seem to do too bad. But anyway, try and get on the offensive a little bit with them. Using the shield charge, bang, straight in, flatten the enemy hero, Does do a chunk of damage. That's what I was kind of saying. This Million's Guard, he's actually quite nice as an ability, but it's the only ability and it doesn't redeem enough of the rest of the unit. Anyway, use them in loose formation, pull into the forties, push through, and that kind of clears that. Secures B point, and then we start to push on to the A point. With the A point secure, we move over to C. Try and grab a little cheeky little stab on that short bow. Didn't get the kill, unfortunately. But as we round the corner, nice little unit of Rattans. Line the unit up, go straight for the guard charge. Goes in, gets a few extra kills, does a little bit of damage, mostly blocked by these palace guards. We end up fighting then just in a loose formation. The problem in these sort of situations where it's just like a chaotic melee like this, being just in a static shield formation isn't really very useful. You can't really contribute very much. You have to fight in a loose formation. The damage just isn't really there to be all that effective with them. I think kind of the problem is, you know, if they had something like a cover commander, if you compare them to an Imperial Shield Guard, then I think it would make them a lot more viable. They are a decent shield unit, but because they lack the damage and they lack the flexibility of other shield units, they really sort of lose utility. And I think it's that more than the specifically low damage that is the problem for me. If they added a cover commander onto it, you know, it wouldn't make them an amazing combat unit. They're not suddenly going to change the course of the battle. They'd still be primarily a shield unit, but at least then in those sort of loose encounters you could actually drag them into be useful. Like when you're just fighting a few stray units, that sort of 1 or 2 loose berserkers we saw at the start of the map, you just toggle that cover commander and then get engaged in the fight. I think that would make the unit a lot more usable, at least in my opinion. Anyway, start to push into a main fight, but we just get overwhelmed super quickly. We go in for a shield charge, try and engage the enemy a chunk there, which does get us a bit of damage, but we just get slammed into by a unit of Huskars. And because we get knocked back by an explosion and just sort of lose the unit integrity, they just then start to cut through the unit. We do pick up a few more kills, and so it shows that the unit does at least do some damage, and they aren't a bad shield unit. The amount of stuff that's hitting into them, it's quite impressive actually that they held up for as long as they did. But ultimately, we still get ourselves overwhelmed and killed. And I suppose that really sums up my experience with this unit. God, I can't even speak English, Evo, English. They are a decent shield unit, but they're not amazing. They're not going to be setting the ground on fire. They do get some kills, but not really very many. It does, of course, make it slightly hard to quantify. I know we have support points now in the game, but it never feels quite as meaningful. You are contributing quite a lot to the team, often by using shield units. But it just doesn't make for very exciting YouTube footage, does it really? Just standing blocking arrows for friendly range or something like that. As a utility unit, I think they're a little bit lacking. I think they're a better shield unit. Personally, I would go grey hairs, I would go Imperial Shields over these guys. But that said, they are a decent unit, and I do like the look of them. And they do have the best shields in the game. Who doesn't love a Roman Scutum? Anyway, I think we'll probably leave the video there. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you have, do let me know what you think about the unit in the comments down below. Of course, subscribe to the channel for, well, I won't say lots more, but some more Conqueror Blade content that's slowly making its way out. I think we're about 9 or 10 days since the last video at the time of this recording one, so I'm quite behind. But anyway, thanks for watching guys, and I shall see you all on the next one.